Where does Steven Seagal fall in that line?
He is a legitimate Aikido black belt.
Love him or hate him, you can't deny that this ponytailed, whisper-talking Aikido master turned sheriff has left a trail of chaos wherever he goes. He's a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido, a legitimate martial art credential that very few Hollywood stars can claim. He exploded onto the scene in the late 80s and 90s with hits like Under Siege, Hard to Kill, and Out for Justice. And for a hot minute, he was one of the highest paid action stars on the planet. But somewhere along the line, something shifted. The stories started piling up. Stuntmen refusing to work with him, co-stars rolling their eyes in interviews, directors swearing they'll never touch another Seagal movie, entire crews walking off set, lawsuits, settlements, and even physical altercations. Some people call him a diva. Others call him a bully. A few still defend him as a misunderstood genius. Whatever side you're on, the fact remains. Steven Seagal has been quietly blacklisted, banned, or simply never booked again on more projects than almost any other A-lister in history. So where exactly does Steven Seagal fall on the spectrum from difficult genius to impossible to work with? Today, we're counting down the 20 wildest, most documented, and most talked about incidents that made Hollywood collectively say, yeah, we're good. No more Seagal. From breaking Sean Connery's wrist, yes, really, to walking into the desert for spiritual reflection and costing production a full shooting day, we're leaving no stone unturned. Grab your popcorn, because this is going to be a long, juicy ride. Let's get into it. Let's start with the incident that is still, to this day, considered one of the worst hosting gigs in the 50-year history of Saturday Night Live. The year was 1991, and Steven Seagal was riding sky-high off the success of movies like Marked for Death and Out for Justice. Lorne Michaels and the SNL team thought booking Seagal would be a slam dunk. Big action star, recognizable face, perfect for physical comedy sketches. It turned into an absolute disaster from the very first table read. Cast members like Julia Sweeney, Chris Farley, and David Spade have all gone on record saying that Seagal was completely uncooperative from minute one. He refused to read the writer's sketches as written, demanded to rewrite everything so that he personally got to beat up Hans and Franz, the Nicolas Cage impression guy, and pretty much every other recurring character on the show. He pitched his own idea, as it were, according to everyone present, completely unfunny and borderline psychotic. One infamous pitch. Seagal wanted to play a therapist who solved his patients' problems by sexually assaulting them. Yeah, you read that right. The writers politely declined. Seagal did not take it well. During dress rehearsal, he kept breaking character to complain that the sketches weren't hard enough and that he didn't want to look weak. When the live show finally aired, the tension was palpable. The audience could feel something was off. Sketches fell flat. Seagal delivered every line in his trademark whisper mumble, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Chris Farley later said it was the only time he ever felt genuinely scared of a host. But the real nail in the coffin happened after the show. Lorne Michaels, who almost never outright bans anyone, made an immediate and permanent decision. Steven Seagal would never be invited back. Not for hosting. Not for cameos. Not even as a musical guest. Nothing. To this day, Seagal remains one of only a handful of celebrities, alongside Adrian Brody and Martin Lawrence, who are officially persona non grata at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. In the years since, former cast members have been brutal. Nicolas Cage, who wasn't even in that episode, said on Howard Stern that the 1991 cast begged him to impersonate Seagal in future sketches just so they could roast him. Tim Meadows famously said, "He's the only host who made us all wish we were somewhere else." Even Lorne, who is notoriously diplomatic, has never defended the booking. The fallout was immediate. Seagal's public image took its first major hit. Up until that point, he had been marketed as the cool, stoic, untouchable martial arts master. After SNL, people started seeing the ego underneath. And this was only the beginning. Picture this, 1983. Sean Connery, the original James Bond, is coming out of retirement for one last 007 style adventure called Never Say Never Again. The producers want the fight scenes to look authentic, so they hire a relatively unknown martial arts instructor named Steven Seagal to train the cast and choreograph the action. At first, everything is professional. Connery, always a consummate pro, is eager to learn. Seagal is in his element showing off Aikido wrist locks and joint manipulations. Then, during one sparring session, Connery throws a playful punch, nothing hard, just testing the waters. According to Connery himself in multiple interviews, including one with Jay Leno, Seagal grabbed his arm, executed a lightning-fast Kotegeshi wrist twist, and snap. Connery's wrist broke clean. Connery has always maintained it was deliberate. He said Seagal's eyes had that "I'll show you's boss" look right before the twist. Seagal, of course, claims it was an accident and that Connery simply had brittle bones for a man his age. But here's the thing. Connery finished the entire movie with a fractured wrist, wearing a cast under his suits in several scenes. You can actually spot it if you look closely. The incident became legend in Hollywood stunt circles. Sean Connery, the man who defined cinematic toughness for a generation, allegedly got his wrist broken by a ponytailed extra who wasn't even credited in the film. And Seagal? He walked away thinking he'd proven something. Years later, when asked about it on British talk shows, Connery would just smirk and say, "Let's just say I never hired that particular instructor again." Meanwhile, Seagal started telling anyone who would listen that he took James Bond's wrist like it was a badge of honor. Whether you believe it was ego, jealousy, or a genuine accident, one thing is undeniable. From that moment on, a quiet but firm rule started circulating among stunt coordinators. If Steven Seagal is on set, double-check every single move, because the man has a habit of taking things too far. Fast forward to 2010. Robert Rodriguez is shooting Machete, a glorious, over-the-top grindhouse throwback packed with A-listers doing cameo roles for fun of it. One of those cameos belongs to Steven Seagal, playing the villainous drug lord Torres. Most actors on that set treated it like a party. Robert De Niro cracking jokes, Michelle Rodriguez blowing things up, Lindsay Lohan in a nun outfit with a machine gun. Everyone was in on the joke. Everyone except Steven Seagal. During a press junket, Jessica Alba, who was one of the leads, was asked about working with the legendary action star. In the most innocent, polite way possible, she referred to him as my co-star, the actor Steven Seagal. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Seagal, who was sitting right next to her, leaned into the microphone and corrected her in the most dead serious tone imaginable. "I'm not an actor. I'm an officer of the law." The room went silent. You can actually watch the clip on YouTube. Alba's face is priceless. She blinks twice, processes what just happened, and then just repeats, "Right? He's Steven Seagal," and moves on like a pro. But behind the scenes, it was worse. Multiple crew members from Machete have said that Seagal spent the entire shoot trying to convince everyone that he was a real-life deputy sheriff, which, to be fair, he technically was in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, thanks to a reality TV deal. He refused to be called Mr. Seagal and instead insisted on Deputy Sheriff Seagal on his chair back and call sheets. When the prop department gave him a fake badge, he threw away and brought his own real one from home, complete with loaded sidearm, which promptly got him a visit from the on-set armorers and a stern talking to from Rodriguez himself. The ego didn't stop at the badge. Seagal repeatedly tried to change his character's death scene because real law enforcement officers don't die that way. Rodriguez finally had to sit him down and remind him that Torres literally gets his intestines pulled out with a meat hook in the script. Seagal's response? "I've been in real firefights. That wouldn't happen." Rodriguez just stared at him until Seagal finally did the scene, but not before making the stunt team rehearse it 23 times because he claimed the hook wasn't anatomically accurate. Danny Trejo, who has worked with literally everybody in Hollywood and is the most chill human alive, later said it was the only time he ever saw Robert Rodriguez almost lose his temper on set. Alba summed it up best in a later interview. It was like working with a guy who thought the movie was a documentary about himself. Long before she was the unflappable Alicia Florrick on The Good Wife, Juliana Margulies was a young actress trying to break in. In the early 1990s, she landed an audition for a Steven Seagal movie. The exact title has never been publicly confirmed, but most insiders point out for justice. Instead of a normal casting office, the audition was scheduled for Seagal's hotel suite in Los Angeles. Red flag number one. But in the #MeToo era, that wasn't uncommon for big stars. Margulies arrived, nervous and professional, and sat on the couch to read through Sides with Seagal. As she shifted to get comfortable, her hand brushed something hard under the cushion. Thinking it was a remote control, she reached down and pulled out a fully loaded 9mm Beretta. Her blood ran cold. Seagal, sitting across from her in a silk kimono, casually said, "Oh, that's just for protection. You never know in this town." Margulies has recounted this story on multiple occasions, including on the Katie Couric show and in print interviews. She said the gun was cocked and ready to fire. She immediately wrapped up the reading, politely excused herself, and left the room shaking. When she actually booked the part a few days later, her agent had negotiated a contractual clause that she would never be alone in a room with Seagal during filming. She got the clause. During production, she made sure there were always at least 3 other people present whenever they shared a scene. Other actresses from the same movie later confirmed they were given the same advice by crew members. Whatever you do, don't do a one-on-one with Steven. Margulies has been very clear that nothing physical happened to her, but the psychological impact was huge. She says that finding the loaded weapon was the moment she realized Hollywood could be dangerous in ways acting classes never prepared you for. It changed how she approached set safety for the rest of her career. That story quietly circulated for years, long before the Weinstein scandal broke. After #MeToo, several outlets reached out to Seagal's team for comment. The response was a blanket denial that the audition ever happened, despite Margulies naming the hotel, the floor, and even the color of the couch. If there's one single story that stunt performers still tell with a grin 30 years later, it's the day legendary stuntman and grappler judo Gene LeBell made Steven Seagal pass out and allegedly lose control of his bodily functions on the set of Out for Justice, 1991. Gene LeBell is Hollywood royalty. The man who trained Bruce Lee choked out a boxer in a real challenge match in the 1960s, and has more credits than most actors have lines. In 1991, he was brought on to Out for Justice to choreograph the fight scenes and make sure Seagal's Aikido looked believable. According to everyone who was there, and this has been corroborated by at least a dozen crew members in books, podcasts, and interviews, Seagal was walking around set bragging that nobody can choke me out because Aikido supposedly makes you immune to choke-proof. He kept repeating, "You can't choke an Aikido master. The energy just flows around the neck." Gene LeBell, then 59 years old but still terrifyingly strong, finally had enough. He looked at Seagal and said, "Want to bet?" Seagal, never one to back down from proving his superiority, accepted the challenge right there between takes. What happened next has become stunt community gospel. Gene stepped in, slipped behind Seagal, applied a basic Hadokajime, rear naked choke, and within seconds Seagal's legs buckled. His eyes rolled back. He went completely limp, and, according to every single eyewitness, including director John Flynn, Seagal urinated and defecated in his GI pants. The set went dead silent except for the unmistakable sound and smell of what had just happened. When Seagal came to, he was furious. He reportedly screamed at LeBell, threatened to sue him, and demanded the entire crew be fired for laughing. LeBell's response was legendary. "If you want to press charges, kid, go ahead. But first you might want to change your pants." Seagal has denied the soiling part for decades, claiming it's an urban legend started by jealous stuntmen. Gene LeBell, however, has never denied it. When asked directly on the Joe Rogan Experience and other platforms, his exact quote is always the same smirking line. "I'll let you decide what happened. All I'll say is the dry cleaner sent me a big bill afterward." The fallout was immediate. Seagal allegedly tried to get LeBell fired, but the crew threatened to walk if Gene was removed. LeBell stayed, Seagal sulked, and from that day forward a quiet boycott began in the stunt community. Top-tier guys started turning down Seagal movies unless the money was insane. The phrase Seagal peed himself story spread so fast that even Bruce Willis referenced it in a 1998 Playboy interview. Executive Decision 1996 was supposed to be Seagal's big leap into ensemble blockbuster territory alongside Kurt Russell and Halle Berry. Instead, it became the set where John Leguizamo learned the hard way that laughing at Steven Seagal is hazardous to your spine. On the very first day of rehearsal, Seagal strode in late, wearing sunglasses indoors and his trademark look, and announced to the entire room in his whisper voice, "I'm in charge here. What I say goes." John Leguizamo, who has literally never been able to keep a straight face in his life, let out an involuntary chuckle. Not a mean laugh. Just a natural reaction of a comedic actor hearing an action star declare himself emperor on day one. Without warning, Seagal stepped forward, drove his elbow into Leguizamo's solar plexus, and slammed him backward into a brick wall so hard that the wind was knocked out of him and he crumpled to the floor, gasping. The room full of cast and crew froze in horror. Leguizamo has told the story dozens of times, Conan, Wendy Williams, his own one-man shows, always with the same details. Seagal loomed over him and hissed, "You think that's funny?" Kurt Russell reportedly stepped between them and told Seagal, "Touch him again and we're going to have a problem." The tension hung in the air for the rest of the shoot. From that day on, Leguizamo says the set was split into two camps. People who were terrified of Seagal and people who quietly hated him. Halle Berry later confirmed in interviews that Seagal was difficult and that everyone walked on eggshells. Even the director, Stuart Baird, reportedly begged the studio to keep Seagal's scenes limited because every day with him was a hostage negotiation. The irony? In the final cut of the movie, Seagal's character dies in the first 15 minutes in a twist that was kept secret from him until the premiere. When the screen cut to black on his death scene, theaters across America erupted in cheers. Leguizamo says he's never laughed harder in his life than when he saw the audience reaction on opening night. Under Siege 1992 remains Steven Seagal's biggest commercial hit, and the one movie that made him a household name. It's also the film where then 22-year-old former Playboy model named Erika Eleniak had her very first major acting role, famously popping out a giant cake in a sailor outfit. What most people don't know is how close that scene came to turning into something far darker because of Seagal's on-set behavior. According to multiple cast and crew members, including Eleniak herself in later interviews, Seagal repeatedly pushed the director, Andrew Davis, to add an unscripted sex scene between his character Casey Ryback and Eleniak's character Jordan Tate immediately after the cake moment she jumps out of the cake. Eleniak was visibly uncomfortable with the idea. She had signed on for a fun, PG-13 action cameo, not an explicit scene with a man 20 years older than her. When she politely declined, Seagal allegedly began pressuring her directly, cornering her between takes and saying things like, "It'll look more realistic," and "real Navy SEALs would take what they want." The atmosphere on the enclosed battleship set, actually a decommissioned World War II vessel, quickly became claustrophobic and intimidating. That's when Gary Busey, playing the villainous Commander Krill, stepped in. Busey, who is infamous for being absolutely unhinged himself, drew a hard line. He pulled Seagal aside and, in his unmistakable wild-eyed drawl, told him, "You touch that girl or push this scene one more inch, and I will personally throw you overboard in front of the entire crew." Multiple witnesses say Busey stayed physically near Eleniak for the rest of the shoot, whenever Seagal was around. Eleniak has confirmed the story in several podcasts, saying Busey became her unofficial bodyguard, and that without his intervention, she's not sure she would have finished the movie. Tommy Lee Jones, another co-star, reportedly backed Busey up and told producers that if anything happened to Erika, he was walking. In the end, the cake scene stayed exactly as scripted. Sexy but playful, no additional nudity or intimacy. Seagal sulked for days, but the line was held. It's one of the rare instances where Seagal's behavior was shut down in real time by fellow cast members refusing to let it slide. By 1996, Seagal was already difficult. But the Glimmer Man marked the moment Hollywood realized his ego had gone full-on mystical delusion. Halfway through Principal Photography, Seagal announced to director John Gray that he had experienced a profound spiritual awakening overnight and could no longer portray a character who kills anyone. Keep in mind, this is a buddy cop action movie in which Seagal's character, Detective Jack Cole, is supposed to gun down, strangle, and blow up roughly 20 henchmen over the course of the film. The original script ended with Seagal executing the main villain with a point-blank headshot. Seagal now refused to do any of it. What followed was chaos. Entire action sequences had to be hastily rewritten to have Keenan Ivory Wayans' character do all the killing, while Seagal simply subdued bad guys with wrist locks and then preached about Tibetan Buddhism. The final confrontation was shot with Seagal improvising a monologue about the sacredness of all life, while the villain conveniently committed suicide off-screen. When the studio saw the dailies, they panicked and forced expensive reshoots to restore some of the original body count. Seagal refused to participate in the reshoots unless the villain was allowed to live and become a monk. The compromise: they shot the death scene with a double from behind and dubbed Seagal's voice, saying a prayer over the body. The budget ballooned by almost $4 million. John Gray has never worked with Seagal again and still calls it the most bizarre derailment of a movie I've ever seen. Even the film's editor admitted in a 2018 interview that half the reason the final cut feels so schizophrenic is because they were literally stitching together two completely different movies. The violent action flick they started with, and the pacifist fever dream Seagal tried to turn it into mid-shoot. When you look across all these accounts, the clashes, the behind-the-scenes tension, the unpredictable behavior, and the stories that have followed Steven Seagal from one production to the next, a clear pattern begins to form. Some of these moments come from direct testimonies, others from long-circulated industry anecdotes, and many remain debated. Yet together, they paint the picture of a Hollywood figure whose presence on set has often sparked strong reactions, whether out of admiration, frustration, or disbelief. For some collaborators, Seagal brought genuine martial arts expertise, confidence, and intensity. For others, his conduct became a source of conflict, delays, or discomfort. In an industry where teamwork is everything and time is money, even a single moment of ego, miscommunication, or unpredictability can shift the direction of an entire production. But beyond all the rumors and reported incidents, one question still remains for audiences to decide. Do these stories reflect the reality of working with Steven Seagal, or have they grown into Hollywood legend over time? In the end, Seagal's on-set reputation, whether fair, exaggerated, or somewhere in between, has become part of his legacy just as much as his action films. And as long as these tales continue to circulate, people will keep debating what truly happened behind the camera and what it reveals about one of the industry's most polarizing figures.